everyone. Yes, I'm here to do a memo discussion for a history paper, November history paper. Yes, so remember with our history for November, we have two sections. We have section A and we also have section B. When you look at section A is term 3 work and section B is term 4 work. All right, let's start with our first question. Our first question is about the Scramble for Africa. So under the Scramble for Africa, we have question 1.1. Match column A with the correct answer in column B. Write only the correct answer letter in answer column provided. For example, 1.1.1.6H. All right, let's go here. All right, column A, we have the Berlin Conference. And then from the column B, we need to look for a suitable answer that best describe what Berlin Conference is. And the suitable answer here that best describes Berlin Conference is F. All right. Sorry, we have A. We don't have F here. Okay. So here we have a 1.1.1 Berlin Conference. A process of taking over other countries by force done by European powers. B, a competitive struggle to take control of something. C, met in Germany to decide how to divide Africa between leading European powers. D, a group of colonies or a large area controlled by the king. A sacred peace centerpiece responsible for well-being and good health. So here our answer, the suitable answer for 1.1.1 in column B is C. Okay, is C. Is C, right? Then colonization is the process of taking over other countries by force done by European powers. The answer here is A. Then the golden stool is a sacred peace centerpiece responsible for well-being or good health. It's E. And then scramble, a competitive struggle to take over something. That is B. And then empire, a group of colonies or a large area controlled by the king. Our answer is D. Then let's go to question 1.2. You're going to study the map and answer the questions that follow. All right, this is a map. It's source 1A. Remember, history is always a source-based question paper. So here you look at the sources. When you look at our source, we have Africa before colonization, 1800. This is how Africa was before colonization. Now, our question 1.2.1. Identify the kingdom in Southern Africa. The kingdom is Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom is Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom is Great Zimbabwe. That is the kingdom in Southern Africa. Then name the large kingdoms in West Africa. Name the large kingdom in West Africa. The large kingdom in West Africa is Songhai Empire. That is the large kingdom in West Africa. You come here, Songhai Empire. All right. That is our answer. Then this is Great Zimbabwe. All right. That is our answer to the identify the kingdom in Southern Africa is Great Zimbabwe. Then our name the large kingdom in West Africa is Songhai Empire. Right? You come here and write your answer, which is Songhai Empire. All right, then we move on. African people moved freely. Land was communal and used for sharing resources. Support this statement. Use your own knowledge and what you have learned. All right. So during that time, when you look at this source, there was no borders. There were no borders. There were no fixed borders. And also, when you look at this map of Africa, there are no names. Like there are no country names. It's just empires or states. So here, African people moved freely. Land was communally owned and used for sharing resources. Support your statement using your own knowledge. All right. So when I look at this source, your answer could be here. There are no fixed borders and there are no fixed borders. There are no fixed borders. So there are no fixed borders and name of countries, whereby everyone could go into another country freely without having a border pass or without having a passport to cross into another border. Now, that was Africa before colonization. Now, this is the map of Africa in our source 1.3 after colonization. When you look here, Africa was divided according to the empires here. Africa was divided according. Okay, so for example, here you look at your key. Here first, before you attempt any question, you look at the key, and then you see countries that were colonized by the British, shaded that color. Those ones by French, Spanish, Germany, Belgium, Portuguese, Italy, and the ones that were independent, that stayed independent, those that were not colonized. Now, let's see. Identify the country that colonized South Africa. South Africa is somewhere here. It's at the southern tip of Africa. So the country that colonized South Africa is the British. British colonized what? South Africa. Name 2 countries that had the most colonies. All right. Here you look at the countries that had the most colonies by checking which ones are mostly shaded by the same by the same country. All right. Here are our countries that had the most colonies. It was British and France. It was British and France. It was British and France. These are the countries that had the most what? Colonies. All right. So let's move on to the next one. Okay. So you see, like, for example, when you go to most of the countries, they are colonized by the British and also by French people. All right. Name 2 countries that were not colonized, meaning that countries that stayed independent. Those countries were Liberia and Ethiopia. These countries stayed independent. They were never colonized. Those countries were Liberia and Ethiopia. Liberia and Ethiopia. These countries, were never colonized. They stayed free. Right. Then we are going to compare source 1A and source 1B. What are the major differences between the 2 maps? When you look at our source 1 map, it shows no countries and it shows no borderlines. When you look at this map, it is giving us borders and it also giving us the countries that colonized each African country. Like it shows us borders here. You can see where South Africa is, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Tanzania. So when you look at the 2 maps, you give a comparison. All right. For example, you can say in source A, there are no borders and no empires or kingdoms. In source A, in source 1A, there are no borders. There are no borders and empire. There are no borders and empires and kingdoms. And empires and kingdoms. All right? Right. and kingdoms sometimes overlap one another. There are no empires, there are no borders and empires and kingdoms. Sometimes overlap one another. Right. That is one difference. Then, meaning like in source 1 and A, people move freely. There were people moving freely. And then when you look at in source B, when you look at source B, there is fixed. In source B, there is fixed, comma. You can also call them clear borders. Clear borders. And all have place names. Yes, all have place names. African kingdoms and empires disappeared. That's the difference between source 1 and source B, like you see here. When you look at source B, there is borders. These are borders. When you look at source B, these are borders that divide one country from another country or divide a province from another province. You see, they are here. So, yes. So there is borders, okay? When you look at the kingdoms or empires, they disappeared. There is borders. There is clear borders. And all places have got names. Whereas in source B, the map, there is no borders, meaning people could move freely from one empire to another. Let's look at source 1.4.1. Refer to the cartoon below and answer the questions that follow. Source 1. All right, we're going to talk about the scramble and partitioning of Africa. All right, that is the map. It shows the scramble and partitioning of Africa. So here it's not given to you apart from here, okay? If you read properly, this is the title of the map. Then, which event took place? The event definitely is the scramble. And partitioning of Africa. That's the event that is taking place. All right. Let's look at question 1.4.2. Explain what the men in the cartoon are doing. When you look at the men in the cartoon, they are trying, they are using a lot of force. They are pulling this side, pulling that side. So when you look at these men, these are from Spain. This is France, this is Belgium, this is Great Britain, this is Germany, this is Italy. So they are trying to divide Africa into small colonies, right? So now when you look at question 1.4.2, explain what the men in the cartoon they are doing. Definitely they are dividing Africa amongst themselves. Yeah, so they are dividing Africa amongst themselves. Right. Let's go to 1.4.3. Explain why African leaders were not invited in the conference. The conference they are talking about, remember, is the Berlin Conference. So, you are going to tell us, why do you think African leaders were not invited in the conference? Definitely, the Europeans felt that they were superior to Africans, so there is nothing that Africans could tell them. All right. So they were not invited because Europeans felt that they were superiors. They were superiors. They felt that they were superior. They felt that they were superior to Africa. They felt that they were superior to Africa. They were superior to to Africa. That's why they never invited them to the conference. Okay, how does the cartoonist feel about the event shown in the cartoon? Justify your answer. So every time they tell you to justify, it means that they need you to give a reason for your answer. So now the question is, how does the cartoonist, the person who created the cartoon, feel about the event shown in the cartoon? Justify your answer. Let's see. All right, definitely, the cartoonist feels very unhappy. The cartoonist feels angry, disappointed. All right. So we come to know about this because the cartoonist called it the mad scramble and even showed them sweating. When you look here, the caption is by the cartoonist, the mad scramble for Africa. Right. And then when you see here, you can see the sweats of these men. You can see these are sweats, you see, in form of water dropping. Okay. So definitely the cartoonist was mad, the cartoonist was angry, the cartoonist was unhappy. And what justifies our answer is he calls it the mad scramble for Africa. So how does the cartoonist feel? You say feels, the cartoonist feels. You can say unhappy, unhappy. You can say sad. Okay. You can say disappointed. Okay. And then that is how the cartoonist feels. And now you need to justify your answer. Okay. So this is how we justify our answer. We say the cartoonist called it the mad scramble for Africa. Right, then we are done. Let's move on to the next one. All right, our next question is 1.5, paragraph writing, results of colonization in Africa. Write a paragraph of about 15 lines and explain the results of colonization in African continent. All right, when you look at the results of colonization, again, the results of colonization happened, for example, there was an economic impact, there was a political impact, there was also a cultural impact. All right. So, for example, when you're writing a paragraph, you need to introduce, okay, your point of view. All right. You need to introduce your point of view. For example, you can try to explain what is colonization in your introduction, and then in your body, you can talk about how the results of colonization. You can talk about you can talk about the legacy of colonization. The legacy of colonization was created. The legacy of colonization was created. For example, that you can explain that who owns land, who works for whom, oppression and poverty. Then under the next thing, you can talk about the next result. You can talk about the economic impacts of colonization. You can talk about the economic impact. It had an economic impact. All right. For example, here, under the economic impact, you can talk about Europeans. They extracted raw materials such as cash crops and exported them to Europe. Here the Europeans extracted raw materials, and transported or exported them to Europe. Okay. So, one of the economic impact was that Europeans extracted raw materials and they exported them to Europe. That is to say, they forced African people into wage labor to pay taxes. Infrastructure like railway and roads developed to help Europeans ship goods to Europe. That was the economic impact. Then let's talk about another impact, which is the political impact. Okay. With the political impact, you can talk about loss of land for African people, loss of land for African people. Okay. You can talk about different tribes. You can talk about different tribes and communities were joined together as one flag or identity. Okay. Then another one, you can talk about another impact, which was culture. Okay, another result, culture impact. With the cultural impact, you talk about they ignored indigenous knowledge, They ignored indigenous knowledge. They brought Christianity. Okay, and their own. They brought Christianity and their own languages. For example, you can talk about English. They brought in English. They brought in French and Portuguese. They also changed name places. They changed name places. They brought European culture. And ideas. They introduced Western education. You can talk about medicines. You can talk about technology. And sports. Okay, so those were some of the impacts of colonization. Okay, then we are done with our section A, which is term 3 work. Let's move on to term 4 work, which is question 2, World War I, 1914 to 1918. So again, to match column A with the correct answer in column B, write only the correct answer later in the answer column provided. For example, we have propaganda, we have volunteer, conscription, we have conscientious objectors, then we have the traitor. Right. So we have propaganda. A freely offers to take part in the army. Fighting and killing people was wrong, betrays his or her country. Technique that attempts to influence mass public opinion. Compulsory military service. Propaganda. All right. So we're going to look for the correct opinion answer or the correct definition for propaganda. The correct definition of propaganda is D. These are techniques that attempt to influence mass public opinion. Then volunteer is to freely offer to take part. Volunteers is freely to take part in the army. Then you have conscription. Conscription is E, which is compulsory military services. Then conscientious objectives. Conscientious objectives, those are B, that is fighting and killing people was wrong. Then traitor, it goes to C, which is betrays his or a traitor betrays his or her country. So we are done. Now we're going to look at 2.2. It's a sketch. Study the sketch below and answer the questions. When you look at this sketch was adopted from source Spot On NCS grade 9 page 69. What was the name given to the long holes dug on the ground to protect soldiers? Those were called trenches. When you see these soldiers, they are under the trenches. Those were called trenches. Name any two characteristics of the above mentioned long dug holes. Those dug holes were unhygienic. They were unhygienic, meaning they were filthy. They were cold and wet. Okay, conditions. These are some of the characteristics. Conditions. They had lice. Okay, you can end. Rats. Infested. Okay, those trenches, they had smell of dead bodies. Okay, they had smell of poison. Smell of poisonous gas. And also, they had lack of what? Privacy. Since they lived and stayed there. Then describe the line of the soldiers in these long dug holes mentioned. You see this line? They're in a line. Okay, that line was described. All right. So describe the life of the soldiers in these long dug holes mentioned above. All right. So when we're describing the life, we talk about the life of the soldiers in the trenches were a pure nightmare. The life of soldiers in the trenches were a pure nightmare. Were a pure nightmare. They were horrific. They were horrific. They lacked sleep. Lack of sleep. That was the life. Okay. Soldiers got disease. They got diseases called trench foot. Okay, you can talk about they got beaten. They got beaten by rats and lice. And lice. Okay. And also there was mustard gas was in the air. Okay. Okay, then let's go to our question 2.2.4. Some of these soldiers were very, very young. They survived the war. Imagine yourself in their shoe and briefly summarize life after war. All right. So you imagine yourself in their shoes. First and foremost, you would have memories. You would have memories of sheer terror and horror. You would have memories of sheer terror and horror. You'll have nightmares. You will have nightmares during night. All right. Another one, you will also have loss of sleep. Another one, you will also have you start being aggressive. Okay, you can also talk about you may have a mental disorder. Okay, you can also have a post-traumatic stress disorder. A post stress disorder. Okay, let's move on to the next. Refer to the sketch below and answer the questions that follow. As more and more men went off to the flight, women began to take over traditional male jobs. Women worked in agriculture, industry, transport, and in manitious factories. The daily life for women changed. Skirts became short and simple undergarments, replaced corsets. Many women cut their hair because long hair was dangerous in factories. Women started smoking and drinking even in public. Some get better education as many had been denied prior to the war. One of the most important political changes was that women over 30 were given the right to vote in 1920. This source was also adapted from Spot On NCS grade 9. All right. So, what work did women traditionally do before World War? Okay. Okay. Traditionally, before World War I, women were domestic workers. They did domestic work. They did nursing. They did teaching and secretarial work. Okay. Why did jobs outside home become open to women during World War I? Definitely because men were fighting. Men were fighting in the war. What do you think women felt when they found out that women had replaced them? How do you think men felt when they found out that men had replaced them in the workplace? Motivate your answer. Definitely, they felt not happy. Definitely, they felt not happy. They felt not happy. They felt not happy. And how do you motivate your answer? definitely men were passing comments that were sarcastic, because men were passing comments that were sarcastic. Hey, women who worked outside the home always work harder than men. Justify your answer. All right. They always worked harder than men because they had to do their outside job and come back home and do domestic job. Women had to do outside jobs and come back and do domestic work at home. Okay, let's look at essay writing. With essay writing, we're going to see why World War I broke out. Okay, write an essay of 1 page and discuss long-term causes of World War I. All right, here we're going to talk about, we are going to first do an introduction. Remember, with essay writing, every paragraph is a point. Okay, for example, we have some of the immediate long-term causes, but now here they told us to discuss the long-term causes. Those ones are immediate causes, these are long-term causes. All right, so you talk about the tensions had been growing between the European countries throughout the 19th century. The underlying causes of these tensions were industrialization, growing nationalism, and competition over colonies. This led to arms race, naval rivalry, and revival alliance. This competition and tension led to the long-term causes of World War I. That is your introduction. So you start and say, tensions had been growing between European powers. Tensions had been growing between European countries, or you can call them powers, throughout the 19th century. The underlying causes of these tensions were industrialization. Remember, here these are the points. So here in our introduction, we are listing them. Then you're going to explain each point, each of these as in form of a paragraph. Industrialization, growing nationalism, and competition over colonies. Okay. These led, we are still on the introduction, these led to arms race. They led to a naval rivalry and revival alliance. the competition, and tension led to long-term causes of World War I. Okay, so like the way we have mentioned them, then you need to come and write them down. In the introduction, we've mentioned the long-term causes, so you need to come and explain each cause. First, number one, you talk about nationalism. Okay, nationalism, the growing of nationalism. This was strong in Europe. People began to think of their nation with pride and believed. Nationalism, okay. People began to think of their nation with pride and believed that its interests were very important. Interests were very important. Nationalism made people to think about gaining more land. People to think about gaining more land, to increase their power and prestige. Okay, you can also add on by saying that in Britain, France, in Germany, it became almost a religion. They were nationalistic songs, parades, anthems, and flags. It united people and made them to feel good. That was nationalism. Then after that, you talk about the colonies. Our next point is the colonies. Okay, with the colonies, they were signs. They were a sign of power. And gave the colonies were a sign of power and gave the colonizers more markets. And raw materials for their growing materials for their growing industries. For their growing industries. The race to get more colonies, particularly in Africa, increased tensions between European powers. Okay. You can also add on that Britain had the largest colonial empires. Britain had the largest colonial empires. Followed by France. Germany had a smaller number of colonial power. Colonial power, but wanted to gain more. Okay, so after that, you can talk about the naval. You can talk about Britain had been a leading naval power, meaning the world's greatest sea power. Okay, greatest sea power for over a century. Its navy protected the British Empire and trade routes. Britain was angry when Germany started to build up its navy. The competition between led to increasingly larger navies. The more they competed, the more tense the situation began. Then, another point, you can talk about revival alliances. Okay, with the revival alliances, they were formed. Revival alliances were formed to gain support and protection. In protection, countries where countries grouped themselves together into opposing soldiers or alliances. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed triple alliance. Britain, France, and Russia formed the triple entity. Okay, entity. They were rivalry, and competition between the two groups. Between the two groups. If any country went to war, its allies would join to help. Would join to help. Okay. To prove their strength and power, both alliances wanted to increase the military power. To prove their strength and power, both alliances wanted to increase their military power. Large armies became a source of national pride, industrial development, meant weapons could be produced more quickly. All that was needed was a trigger point. Okay, so that is our essay about why World War I broke out. All right, so for the 20 marks distributed. Okay, so this is your essay. And this essay writing is out of 20 marks. Okay, so with the 20 marks, they are distributed for the causes and explanation. Yeah, so you get 20 marks for the causes and explanation. For example, there is one cause here, which is nationalism. There's another cause, which is the colonies, and another cause, which is the revival alliances. Yes, so well explained. And we also have our introduction. And all these carry marks, plus your conclusion. Yes. Thank you so much for listening. I wish you success in your forthcoming examination.